So the conflict in the Middle East, I mean, especially this past year between Israel and Hamas, it's just been everywhere, hasn't it?
Absolutely dominates the headlines, yeah.
But, to really understand why things are the way they are, why this keeps happening, you really have to look back.
Way back, we need to unpack the history, the deep history of the place both Israelis and Palestinian Arabs call the Holy Land.
Exactly. This beloved, deeply contested region.
And it's not just about the last few years. This goes back over a century. The fascinating thing, really, is how this piece of land, it's about the size of Massachusetts, give or take.
Right, which is kind of hard to picture sometimes.
It is how it was essentially promised, often by outside powers, to two different groups of people. That's where these competing national dreams really started to clash.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. We want to trace that tangled history. We'll start around the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, look at some key agreements, pivotal moments.
See how these big expectations kind of crashed into the reality on the ground?
Yeah. And you'll see how all that history is still playing out right now in today's news.
Okay, so let's kick off with the Ottomans.
Hmm.
When their empire, which had been, well, declining for a long time, finally collapsed after World War I.
Right.
This whole area, what we now think of as Israel and the Palestinian territories, it was carved out of what used to be Ottoman Syria. It had different administrative districts, sure, but it was basically one region under their rule, lots of different people living there.
And then the British occupied it.
They did, and they started calling it Palestine for their mandate territory, which the League of Nations formally granted them.
And what's interesting, and maybe folks don't always realize, is that originally that mandate actually included the land east of the Jordan River too, right? What became Transjordan.
That's a crucial point.
Yeah.
Because very early on, Britain made a decision there.
How did that initial split sort of shape things?
Well, in 1923, Britain let the Hashemite dynasty run Transjordan. It became fully independent later, 1946.
Where?
But the land west of the river, that stayed under direct British mandatory rule right up until 48.
Okay.
And that period, the mandate period, that's when things really heated up. You had the Zionist movement pushing for a Jewish homeland, and you had the Palestinian Arabs wanting self-determination in the place they saw as their ancestral land.
So competing visions, growing tension.
Exactly. A real powder keg of hope and, frankly, a lot of fear on both sides about what the future held for this land. Very different expectations.
Which brings us to 1948. The British leave, the state of Israel is declared. For Israelis, a moment of, achieving statehood, liberation.
But for Palestinians, that same year is the Nakba,
Yeah.
the catastrophe, massive displacement, loss.
One event, two completely opposing experiences. That really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it?
It really does. It's fundamental to understanding the gap. And then less than 20 years later, things change dramatically again. 1967, the Six-Day War.
Right.
Israel occupies the West Bank, Gaza Strip, Golan Heights, and the Sinai Peninsula. And suddenly, these occupied territories become the absolute focus.
They become central to the Palestinian struggle, central to any future peace talks. It just added whole new layers of complexity.
It profoundly changed the whole conflict, yeah.
Now, the map kept changing a bit. Sinai went back to Egypt in '82 after Camp David.
Correct.
But if we jump ahead to the '90s, what about the peace process then, like the Oslo Accords? How do they try to deal with these shared spaces, especially the West Bank and Gaza?
Oslo. Huge attempt in the mid-90s. The Oslo II Accord in 95 specifically created this incredibly complex system in the West Bank and Gaza. You had Area A, B, C, different levels of Palestinian self-rule, different levels of Israeli security control.
Kind of a patchwork quilt of administration.
You could say that. It was a framework, an attempt, trying to find a way to coexist, but deeply flawed. And it created its own ongoing problems with land authority movement.
And then a significant move later, 2005, Israel pulls all its forces and settlers out of the Gaza Strip entirely.
Unilaterally, yes.
Which connects directly back to what we mentioned at the start.
Exactly. Because that same Gaza Strip, the one Israel left in 2005, is where Israeli forces went back into in 2023 during the war with Hamas.
So when you step back and look at it all, wow, the Holy Land, caught in conflict for well over 100 years now. This history, it just shows how deep these roots go.
It's really something. A small piece of land, size of Massachusetts, carrying the weight of a century of these decisions, these conflicts, these promises.
It makes you think, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
Maybe this is the question for you, the listener, to really ponder. After all this time, a century of conflict, all the promises made, the different administrations, peace attempts, Oslo, what does this pattern tell us?
This pattern of withdrawal and then re-engagement, like
Oh.
Israel leaving Gaza in 2005 and going back in 2023.
Yeah. What does that cycle suggest about the real fundamental barriers? What are the obstacles standing in the way of a lasting peace, of genuine self-determination for both Israelis and Palestinians in this land they both love? It's a tough question, and it's still incredibly relevant today.